Hey everybody. I've never done an intro before, so here's my best attempt at that. Tonight we are debating open borders, and specifically for Western countries such as Canada. We thought about Canada in particular. So this topic was proposed by No Gamble, who will be arguing for open borders, and I, Sparks, will be arguing against open borders. And so the way that I have been conceiving of this personally is that I am interested in hearing No Gamble's take here. So the bar we'll set it at is that all he's got to do is convince me. So with that, No Gamble, how about you give us your opening argument?
All right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sparks, for participating in this debate or discussion with me. And thank you to the good people at the Capitalism versus Socialism Discord for hosting us. And thank you to the audience at home who's paying attention. So, my position is I'm in favor of open borders. I'm a Canadian. That's why I focus on Canada in particular. I don't necessarily want to tell people in other countries how they should shape their policy. But as a Canadian, I feel I do have the right, maybe the obligation, to express my views on how the Canadian government should shape immigration policy for Canada. That being said, I do believe open borders is a good policy for everybody. But so what is open borders? Basically, the idea is that anyone or virtually anyone can move to Canada on a short-term or long-term basis. Basically, there'd be no immigration restrictions except for people get deported if they commit serious crimes. They probably wouldn't be eligible to come back, but anybody else. So I think this would have a number of benefits. The people who are, presently in the Philippines or Brazil or any other low-income country who are making, $1.50 an hour, they'd be able to access the Canadian labor market and substantially increase their wages. I think there'd also be a benefit to Canadian entrepreneurs and Canadian businesses to have access to a much larger labor force.
Okay,
On to
give me
you,
just a
Sparks.
second. I'm gonna write down write down the opening statement at least so we can refer back to it.
Cool. Yep. Absolutely. Just let us know when you're ready to go.
Okay. So what I've got is the pitch is virtually anybody can move to Canada, no restrictions except for serious crimes or deportation. So any reason that you would be deported is also a reason that you would be barred from entry. Those in low income countries can come and access the Canadian labor market. And then it's also a benefit to small businesses, entrepreneurs, because it gives them access to an expanded labor market. Is that an accurate summary?
I think you've perfectly summed it up. Yes.
Okay. So my first question comes with the lack of like a quota restriction, right? So what I am envisioning is likely to happen is that because anybody can move to Canada, that it will, I don't know, overflow, so to speak. Like there's only so many jobs. And so in the interim, there is likely to be a significant time period in which there are more people coming in than there are jobs to support them. I also know that some places in Canada have a serious issue with housing. And so it would also be challenging to house all the people coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take that second one first because I think it's the more serious problem. There absolutely is a housing crisis in Canada at the moment, and certainly immigration could aggravate that issue. But I don't think there needs to be a housing crisis. I think that it's the predictable and preventable consequence of bad policy, specifically with regards to zoning. A lot of Canadian cities are zoned large areas for single family homes. So yes, there's a problem, but the problem doesn't need to exist. It exists because of bad policy. If the bad policy was removed, there would be no problem. You could just build denser housing, and so also I believe that higher levels of immigration from, in particular, of quote unquote low skilled labor or people from poorer countries would also help with a solution to the housing problem in that they could work on building houses. To address the first issue, I don't believe there is a fixed supply of jobs. I think that that's something that um, that it's not like there's a fixed amount of work to be done. So the supply of jobs can change. It is variable, and also workers, although they do take up a job, they also create jobs because of their spending. So I don't think that's as serious as an issue because as I say, if somebody comes to Canada and becomes employed, they do that work, but then they spend all their money and they're creating jobs from their spending.
Yeah. So regarding housing, so it sounds like in addition to open borders, but there are other policies that would need to change in order to make this actually viable. Um, the first of which being adjusting zoning to allow more high density housing to be built um, and remove the single family housing problem, the preponderance of this. I'm thinking about like the housing prices in Vancouver and how they're, I mean, it's just, it's Pacific Northwest prices, you know, the whole Pacific Northwest has this issue. Low skill is interesting because by my understanding, when you have like the really dense metropolises that need more housing, it's to support the number of like higher skilled labor jobs that are attracting people to the cities. I think that's the case that's happening in Vancouver. And so if it's low skill labor that you're attracting, so what types of jobs? So you're talking about like construction, right? Um, is construction low skill labor? Can you just like in place and get a construction job? Perfect.
I'm certainly not an expert, but I believe that a lot of it is relatively simple. I mean, it depends what you're building, right? If you're building a house, people are doing framing, and a lot of it is sort of low skilled or manual labor that I think a lot of like Brazilian immigrants, for example, would excel at. Um, I'm not an expert on construction, so I could be way off base there. No, no. To circle back, while it would be best to eliminate the zoning, I think it's also possible that high levels of immigration um, could affect the change that we need with regards to zoning. Like simply having this mass of populous immigrants that need housing could force the change. Even like if we didn't rezone and then we had all these people that needed houses, that might force positive change simply by their existence. Another thing is that a lot of third world immigrants are very comfortable in housing situations that North American natives might not accept. For example, sharing bedrooms, or 6 or 7 people living in a smaller apartment. These are relatively common situations in a lot of countries around the world. So so they might not present as much of an issue as one might think simply by the numbers.
Yeah, but I think in that case, because you're talking about families, right? So there's 6 or 7 people, but they're all in the same family, and so even if you have an increase in the number of families, you're not. I don't think you're as likely to get 6 or 7 strangers to pile into an apartment together.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good point. I'm not sure. I guess probably it is mostly families. Um, yeah, that's a fair point.
So one of the things that I find concerning is that there is gaps. Okay, so actually the first thing, so talking about housing for a second, the idea that this, influx of people will put on the pressure to fix the zoning issue. Do we see evidence of this sort of thing happening in the past? Because when I think about the Pacific Northwest in particular, they have an incredible issue with homelessness. And even though they have high numbers, and they're very visible, there's like public outcry about this, that it still has not influenced them to change their zoning policies. So what I don't know, evidence do you have, like what leads you to believe that this is likely to happen?
Yeah, I guess it's more wishful thinking than necessarily a recent conclusion. Um, yeah, no, that's a good point as well. But I don't think we should necessarily allow the failure of one policy to prevent another good policy from being put in place, even if there are transitional issues. I think the benefits would far outweigh any discomfort that exists as the supply of housing adjusts to the increased demand.
Yeah, well, if the supply of housing adjusts to the increased demand,
Another, another thing
and
is
there
that
is the gap there with jobs too.
another thing is that the housing problems are concentrated in these high density areas like Toronto.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of very affordable housing in Canada as you get outside of these major urban areas, and it's quite possible that simply by economic reality, a lot of these immigrants won't be able to afford to live in the major urban areas. They might spread out to some of these smaller towns.
yeah, which raises an interesting question about like public transit, right? So we can assume generally that most of the jobs will be concentrated in these higher density areas. That's just the reality of job distribution. It's also one of the reasons why it costs more. It's more desirable to live closer to these centers because it's closer to employment. So how will new immigrants, waves of new immigrants, right? There's no restrictions. Um, how will they be able to access those jobs if they don't live in the high density areas?
Well, they should find jobs near where they live if they can.
If they can. So it sounds like the hope is that there will be jobs. Like I'm trying to think of like what is like the collection of jobs that are considered low skilled labor. Because we have construction, right? Building new houses. That's great until the housing gets built. And then that job is not there anymore. So what then would they shift to?
Agriculture, manufacturing. Also, this is like it's not necessarily a problem we have to solve because like they can choose to come here, they can choose not to. That's on them to solve as opposed to on sort of us. Like they're welcome to come here, but nobody has to provide anything for them.
Okay. So I'm going to skip a couple steps. And it sounds like part of what you're pitching is that if there are not enough jobs to meet the demand for jobs, then people will simply stop immigrating.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Okay. Um, is that what you're pitching?
What I'm pitching is open borders, no restrictions. What happens after
Right.
that, let the cards fall how they may.
Okay. So that strikes me as a little irresponsible, but that's not an argument on my part. So I'm going to substantiate that a little bit. One of the things that I'm thinking of is, I believe it is Sweden or a lot of European countries actually. that they are bringing in immigrants, often refugees, right? And so they're not coming necessarily for opportunity so much as fleeing from their situation back home. And if Canada throws open its borders, I can imagine that Canada will become a popular destination for that. So then you have a bunch of people in the country who, like you say, that it's not like your problem or responsibility to make sure that they have jobs, to make sure that they have housing, to make sure that they can eat, right? But then you have a group of people who are unable to find jobs, maybe unable to find adequate housing, don't have transportation to the larger or the denser population centers, might not even have enough for food. So what the so I want to know about Canada's welfare system and both how and whether that it would apply to immigrants coming in.
Well, Canada does have a generous welfare state. In particular, we spend a lot of money on refugees, housing them in like hotels and whatnot. Uh, and again, I think that it's possible the open borders policy could overwhelm the welfare state to a degree. It depends too, because like you say that some of the refugees might not be able to work. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that a lot of them would work or could work. In particular, if there was no minimum wage, they would find some employment at some level. Uh, I think that a lot of them are priced out of the market, especially if they don't speak English or they don't have high demand skills by the minimum wage, which is a problem for low skilled workers in general. But I think that there's not really an issue with the number of jobs that people can always find work, especially if there is no barrier to entry to the labor market.
Okay, so it sounds like there's another proposal in there that the minimum wage would also need to be removed.
It would help. It would certainly help, especially with an influx of quote unquote low skilled workers.
Yeah. So I know that in the United States, that many, I don't know, low skilled workers or immigrants or what have you, are taking agricultural jobs. And you said agriculture for Canada. I'm curious about what agriculture looks like in Canada. Like, what is the availability of jobs there? What do you guys grow?
It's a huge industry. It's I want to say our largest. I'm not certain, but it's up there. Although we do suffer from the reduced growing season, but
Yeah.
we grow a lot of wheat and of
Oh,
course animals. We raise a lot of animals, corn.
okay. Yeah. Do you guys benefit from our corn subsidies at all? I don't know how that works.
No, no.
Okay. Do you grow corn just because you want to?
We might have our own. I'm not sure. I don't, I don't
Okay.
know that.
So we can imagine that a lot of these immigrants would be coming in to help out with the agricultural industry. It sounds like there's a decent number of jobs there. That's hopeful. Also, agriculture happens away from dense population centers. And so building housing nearby that'll probably get around a lot of the housing concerns that you brought up.
Maybe they can be housed on the farm they're working on.
Right. Yeah.
Give them a little shed.
Which could be chill. It could be chill. It also might not be chill. But as you say, that's
it could
not
be
our
very
problem.
chill in the winter time.
Yeah.
As an Alaskan, you understand.
I sure do. Yeah. And that's interesting too, that in rural areas here, there's another issue associated. Actually, this might dovetail with one of your other proposals. But the high use of actually it's not fossil fuels. I think here it's mostly wood, where it's wood burning that that heats homes out in rural areas.
Yeah, I used to have.
I can imagine that would end up being a concern.
and then you have the impact on carbon emissions, because that's one of the worst
Right.
ways.
Yeah, exactly. And we can imagine like in Canada, if you have like a shack on an agricultural property, they're probably going to use wood.
Yeah.
So you're going to be
Plus,
seeing an increase in emissions there.
plus we've got so many trees, like so many.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's okay
So
because
lower
Canada
air
stands to
quality.
benefit from global warming. So being an extremely cold country.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some of those effects here. I don't know how much you guys deal with wildfires, though.
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot of
from like
wildfires
a
going on at the
bittersweet.
moment. But some of those have been arson
Yeah.
too. So
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. Yeah. So I can see that potentially reduced air quality is an effect of increased concentration.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
from the fires, from the wood burning.
Yeah. The wood burning. Yeah. Especially if they're, primarily in these rural areas, primarily, if it's primarily agricultural work, right? If we expect that to be kind of like the
Yeah,
bulk of the jobs.
but Canada's a
So
really big
exactly.
country, so it should spread out too.
That too. Yeah. That's funny. We'll spread out. Um, yeah. Yeah. No, I might want to look at that. Might want to look at how it impacts rural areas here in Alaska too.
Yeah, and then how common is wood burning too? I mean, I know we had a wood stove, but I think most people are on something else now. I guess the Mennonites, they might use it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on, because if you're building a shack, right, on an agricultural property, um, then it's most likely that it'll be wood,
Hmm.
or some other kind of fossil fuel, or like kerosene, right, fuels.
Right.
Yeah. Um. So, yeah. So another thing that I'm curious about is, so one thing that Canada really has going for it is that y'all pride yourselves on being multicultural, which is a huge leg up from a place like Sweden. I don't know why Sweden keeps popping up for me. Maybe it's all the I don't know. Somebody tried to give me videos of like, this is what the brown people are doing or whatever. I don't even remember what their intent was in sending it to me. But I ended up seeing a lot of content about Sweden. But one of their big issues was a lack of like integration. So they had historically had a pretty lax immigration policy, but most of their immigrants historically had been from Finland. And culturally, Finland and Sweden, they're not that different. And so it wasn't that weird. But then when they started opening their doors to refugees, or I guess they always had open doors, but like the Syrian refugees, or like refugees from the Middle East were coming in, their countries were war torn, that they started running into integration issues. Because there were people coming in who were from a completely different culture. They didn't have enough jobs to support them. They didn't necessarily have enough housing to support them. And so what the people were seeing was, people coming in, they're, piling into small apartments or whatever. And they were generally, they weren't working, right? And so they were kind of like delinquents, people saw them as like, oh, like they're lazy, they pile in, everything's a mess. And because of the existing cultural difference, tensions were pretty high. And people felt unsafe, even when in some cases they had no reason to feel unsafe. But there's also, you also see an increase in crime when you have people who, don't have jobs, who feel extremely alienated from their communities. So,
Yeah, I feel that historically, thus far, we Canada's been pretty good in terms of integration. We do have areas that are sort of predominantly one ethnic minority, but overall, it works out. Obviously, we're talking about an entirely different scale. I also don't necessarily see a problem with ethnic enclaves within a country. I don't think that everybody has to be the exact same. Uh, I mean, um, and yeah, I don't know. I don't see a I don't see a huge problem with integration, um, at least so far as things have been going so far. I think that people are pretty much the same no matter what country or culture they're from, and these are just superficial differences. At the end of the day, we all just want to sort of do our bit and go home to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fine perspective to have. I don't know what it's like in Canada. Like I said, one thing that Canada has going for it is that there is sort of like this multicultural kind of focus, right? That like Canada prides itself on this. So I can imagine that there is sort of like this liberal attitude, I guess is what you could call it, that like we're all people at the end of the day. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with, I don't remember what you said, ethnic enclaves, cultural enclaves. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily either. But what ended up being wrong in Sweden, the tension, and America sees that too. America prides itself on being very multicultural, but it's still a problem in rural areas or in areas with high refugee populations. But there is there's concerns around that, and active work needs to be done to ensure that those tensions don't erupt.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with Sweden, like, I don't know how much of that is real and how much of it is sort of xenophobia. Um,
Right.
I'm not on the ground there. I've read the news stories, and I think a lot of it's probably sensationalized. You're also dealing with people who've gone through a lot of trauma, right? I mean, there's Syrian refugees in
Yeah.
particular, um, so. Uh, but if you have, I think if you have a society with a functioning legal system, people act out regardless of why or where they're from. You deal with them sort of harshly and that's it, right? What else can you do? Uh, yeah, there's going to be
Does Canada have a history of that?
of what?
Of dealing with people harshly?
No, no, it's a very lenient. Well, it depends on your perspective, I guess, but it's a
Yeah.
pretty lenient legal system here, as far as I understand it.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that might be, I don't know, challenging because of maybe Canada is not prepared to handle that if the crime rate shoots up due to
If
high
it
levels
shoots
of
up, I
poverty.
mean, I see no reason why it should. I don't think that people in third world countries are a bunch of criminals, right?
Right. But also poverty. Right. So you're saying there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to get jobs when they get here. That's kind of like up to them. We're kind of like fingers crossed. Yeah, we hope that they are going to get work. Um, I don't know what the ethnic makeup of or ethnic or cultural makeup of the agricultural sector is. Um, I don't know what that looks like historically. So I can imagine that pensions might increase there.
Yeah. There's definitely anytime you have different cultures intermixing, there's going to be culture shock. There's going to be uh, some degree of if not conflict, differences. But that's just the growing pains of a healthy society. I don't think it's a deal breaker.
Okay. Um, do you propose something to be done about this, or we just
No,
kind of hope it resolves itself?
Yeah, just sort of play it by ear. I mean, who knows? Who knows to what degree there would be an issue, and you just have to, I mean, deal with it if it pops up, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, looking in context at other countries, I would say that it's likely enough that it ought to be planned for.
But if you look at like Malaysia, they've got sizable ethnic minorities, and they all get along pretty well. Different cultures.
Yeah, but do they have an open borders policy?
No, but they've got like a nation doesn't have to be homogenous to work. And you
Yeah,
look at
it's not the homogeneity that I'm not the homogeneity itself, at least, but the mix of um, cultural differences plus, poverty.
yeah. Um,
Also, increased competition in the job market. Um, it's that so like a proposal for the removal of the minimum wage. Um, so I want to clarify because many of the solutions that you propose to these issues are sort of like additional policy changes. And so I'm wondering because you've also said that it's not necessary, just that it would like help,
yeah.
right? So are you proposing these additional policies or are you not?
Well, like I'm obviously in favor of eliminating the minimum wage, but I
Yeah,
would support open borders even within the present context of a minimum wage, a welfare state, all these other things. I just think that these would create additional problems, but even still, I do support open borders primarily because it has the transformative power to improve so many lives immediately. All these people that are working for 50 cents at $1 an hour, you know, instantly being able to make 20 times as much money. Um, so it's a tremendous opportunity for millions, and at I think a relatively minor cost, if even any cost at all. And in fact, it would probably be a tremendous boon to our economy here as well. So I think it's win-win. But my focus is on the tremendous benefit it offers to the immigrants coming here who can earn so much more money immediately.
yeah. I mean, I know that that's a thing with in America too, where immigrants will come here because like the like it costs more to live here, but they can live cheaply here and send a bunch of money back home.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but that is only really valid if they have somebody back home that they're sending the money to. If they bring their whole family up here, um, then it's different because the cost of living is also higher here.
yeah. But even if they're not sending back money back home, they can just spend it on themselves, right? They're still earning so much more. Yes, the cost of living is higher, but not anywhere near to the disparity in the wages. And that cost of living, the higher cost of living, also is a higher standard of living. I've spent a number of years in third world countries, and if I wanted to live like I lived in Canada, it would cost maybe half as much or something. But the wages are like 10 times as much. So
Okay, so it's like okay, so the wages would increase more than the cost of living increases.
if I go to a grocery store here in the Philippines, groceries are not substantially cheaper than they are in Canada.
Mm, okay, yeah, it's fair.
Now I can go to a restaurant. It's a lot cheaper. So there's differences, but it's
Oh yeah, well because of the wage difference, right?
right, right, exactly. I can go to a hotel. It's a lot cheaper. Again, the wages, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
the service industry is a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. So that's 1 point in your favor.
Hooray!
um, you say that there would be a tremendous benefit. Sell me more on these benefits.
Right. Well, mostly just the wages the workers make and the opportunities, and like even just looking at the minimum wage, right? So $15 an hour is the minimum wage in Canada. But that's the very minimum. They're not necessarily going to make the minimum. There's no reason after a few years they can't learn a skilled trade and be making $30, $40 an hour, So literally 40 to 50 times as much money as they would be making in say Brazil, for example. And so some estimates are are that open borders would double world global GDP because you have all these people coming to first world countries, earning higher standard of living, and yeah, I think it would be pretty good.
Yeah, we have low population density in Canada,
Yeah,
so
a lot of space for people.
there's
Although
yeah a room for people to be.
a lot of that is like tundra and whatnot that you don't necessarily
Yeah,
want to live in, but
yeah. I'm still thinking about the transportation piece, right? Okay, so like we're talking about a higher standard of living. Um, like there's trade-offs, right? So one of the things is that so you said pitching it even if there is no removal of the minimum wage, which you say removing the minimum wage would increase the number of jobs available because they wouldn't have to pay that minimum in order to be like a competitive
yeah,
business, right? That's
like you mentioned, and this happens in Canada too, where you have like immigrant families on welfare, and I think it's
um,
probably not that they won't even want to be on welfare. It's just that they have no access to the labor market, with the skill set they have, with the language issues they have. Nobody's going to hire them when there's, so many Canadian applicants that don't have these issues that are willing to work for the same wage. But if they could work for $5 or $6 an hour doing some, just watching a store or whatever, cleaning, they probably would. So, so I think that, yeah, I mean, there's issues with regulations that make problems worse than they have to be.
one of the things that I am imagining is sort of like, well, okay, so one of the things that you brought up is that the businesses have Canadian applicants don't have all of these issues who can work for minimum wage.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like if this is a present issue, that there like are not actually enough jobs for them to begin with, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's no fixed supply of work to be done, no fixed supply of jobs. It's something that
Right.
can fluctuate, right? And like a lot of Canadians don't want to do manual labor. It's very
Yeah.
because everybody aims for a college degree and high paying sort of easy work. So there's not that much demand for certain types of jobs. There's a lot of demand for like other jobs, but like not a lot of people want to
Okay.
go work on a farm or want to clean
Yeah. That's the
restaurants.
case here too, which is
Yeah,
funny that
yeah,
for well, I mean, cleaning job, it depends on where you go here, but for like agricultural jobs stuff, I remember seeing an article that was like Americans still won't take the agricultural jobs even if you like raise the wage.
yeah. But it's hard work,
So
and it's unpleasant work.
yeah, 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 yeah. So there is potential there. I keep thinking about the agricultural sector. Only so many jobs that can support, but it could be a boon. It could be a boon to the agriculture sector as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
another solution. I mean, I'm not proposing this, but I think it might happen organically. Is that some employers might offer, full room and board, like hotels, could offer full room and board to cleaning ladies, quite easily because they have the excess capacity anyway. And so that might be one issue with solving the housing and whatnot, is that employers would include full room and board with their, in exchange for a reduced salary or whatever.
I am feeling discomfort. um, just like thinking about the psychology of company town type
Yeah.
situations
Well,
where
it's better
your
than
employment
languishing in a favela.
is it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just no
I guess that would be up to
opportunity if
them to
you're,
decide.
yeah.
Yeah, but there's also like, I don't know, freedom. um, locking yourself in one place where your housing is tied to your employment. Like Americans are dealing with this right now with our health insurance is tied to employment. And so we kind of get stuck in jobs because it's not easy to choose a different one.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big source of discomfort, including housing and these employment situations.
Yeah, it's not ideal for sure, but it could be one solution, one way that the influx of immigrants is handled.
Another thing with the potential removal of the minimum wage, also see a sort of unintentional underclass developing. So I think the point of a minimum wage, or the point of setting a minimum wage at all, is that with the higher cost of living, we need to be able to make like the bare minimum. If you can't make the bare minimum, then you can't work there anyway.
Yeah, well, that's assuming the minimum wage raises the wages, which my point of view, my argument is it doesn't. That it's purely prohibitory, and if it's hard to make a living on $6.50 an hour, then it's much harder to make a living on $0 an hour.
That brings into question the welfare system. That Canada has a robust welfare system, and we're assuming that they're coming in like maybe we're not making any other changes besides the open borders. And so the welfare system would be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, maybe for a long time.
Yeah, well, it would be untenable, which I think is the best part. That the welfare system would collapse under the weight of these millions of immigrants, because I mean, we're already $1 trillion plus in debt, and I
So
don't think.
you're advocating to intentionally collapse the welfare system.
Absolutely, yes. I think that probably would happen if there were no substantial reforms made, and you had millions of immigrants. Although, I mean, you don't have to give them welfare too. You could just not make them eligible. I guess would be an easy fix.
Yeah, well, that doesn't fix the other problems. That makes the other problems that I'm bringing up worse.
Well, it's their choice to come here, right? I mean, realistically, they're going to be poor whether they're here or not. So it's just more
So it's a
visible if they're
question about
here.
whether being poor in Canada is better than being poor anywhere else.
Which it is. I mean, it's objectively much much better.
I gotta be honest with you, man. I'm not convinced.
Well, I'm not a very good arguer, so I don't blame you. Well, I think we've covered the subject pretty good for a first cursory examination. Do you have any concluding remarks?
Yeah, well, I I agree that I don't think there's any other pieces to cover necessarily. So we could say maybe in summary that opening borders, open borders in Canada without any other policies to support it, may lead to higher poverty rates, lead to situations in which people are, housing is tied to employment, some decreased air quality, and potential cultural tensions that are not being cared for in an active way, kind of hoping that those work themselves out, and the total collapse of the welfare system. So, yeah, sounds like that's the pitch for open borders.
All right. Well, yeah, I think this has been a good discussion and good to look at some of the criticisms and potential weaknesses of this idea. I believe that open borders would be highly beneficial, both for Canadians and for third world immigrants. And I'd like to thank you again for having this discussion with me, and definitely a lot to think about. Have a great day.
Yeah, for sure.